Hey, it's Jim Sharp. Welcome to the AZ Political Podcast. Headline number one, Meghan McCain told our Mike Broomhead that she won't be doing what her little brother Jimmy said he's going to do, and that's vote for Kamala Harris. However, the daughter of the late Senator John McCain did say what a lot of other Americans are thinking, and that is, she told Mike, quote, "This is a garbage election with garbage candidates." Headline number two, don't tell Republican vice presidential nominee J.D. Vance that Arizona isn't important to the presidential race because Donald Trump's running mate made two appearances over the course of 2 days in the Valley this week. Wednesday at the Chase the Vote event at a Mesa church, and then Thursday he spoke at the Arizona Biltmore Resort in Phoenix. And headline number three, while one Phoenix police officer is now at home recovering, his partner is still in the hospital fighting for his life. After being shot Tuesday evening by a suspect they approached on a burglary call, Phoenix Police Chief Mike Sullivan says this is the 11th time this year that Phoenix officers have been fired on. And that brings me to my guest on the AZ Political Podcast. Joining me to talk about the politics of policing is Phoenix City Councilman Kevin Robinson.
Jim, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So, Councilman Robinson, who was elected last year to represent District 6, which covers Watuki and Arcadia and Biltmore and North Central Phoenix, used to answer to Assistant Chief Robinson. At least in the last decade and a half of your 35 plus years in law enforcement, you started off patrolling in Arcadia in 1980.
Yes, I did. December 19th, 1980, I graduated from the Phoenix Police Regional Training Academy.
And they let 11-year-olds patrol at that point.
I should be so lucky. No, I was 22 at the time, and I had always wanted to be a police officer, much to my mother's chagrin, because obviously it's dangerous work. Ever since I was about 5 years old, I proclaimed that I would be a police officer, and I can happily say I lived my life's dream ambition by being a police officer.
By the way, as a police officer, Councilman Robinson won the award for the Medal of Valor and the Medal of Merit. That's the police department's two highest citations for heroism and bravery. So this was not just a mundane, kind of quiet career in law enforcement.
No, I don't know that you can do 36 and a half years in law enforcement and not be confronted with situations where you do what you're there to do for it. Perfect example, the two officers the other evening who were wounded in a line of duty, they were there to do a job, and they did that job. Unfortunately, as you said, one is, still in the hospital fighting for his life. The other is at home, and every police officer faces those types of dangers in their line of work.
So let's talk about the dangers sometimes police face from politicians, the people that don't back them sometimes. Just as you were coming on the council, former council member Carlos Garcia was exiting the council. He had lost his race. Was there anything that, and by the way, he ran on what a lot of people would have described as an anti-police platform. Was there anything that former council member Garcia said or did that ever motivated you as a former police officer to want to get into politics?
Well, I will tell you that was in the back of my mind when I decided to run. I did not like his approach, wearing shirts that, it was just, he just, in my opinion, really was giving the finger to law enforcement. And I thought that was wrong in so many ways. And it was a part of the motivation behind me wanting to serve on the council. I felt that my background, my experience, my life experience, just all of those types of things would add to the council, give them a perspective that they would not normally have. Especially after years with, 4 years with Carlos Garcia, I'm the polar opposite. I just am. And I'm not saying everything that law enforcement and the police do is right. I'm not saying that.
Right.
But I am saying that people make mistakes and we should move forward from there.
This had been brewing for a number of years, but it really kind of came to a head. The politics of policing and talking about defunding the police and all these other things really kind of came to a head. Something that happened in Minneapolis, over the summer of 2020, when George Floyd was killed, with an officer kneeling on his neck. It was an awful scene, a terrible thing. But things seem to have swung back a little bit, at least the other way, where, there aren't people saying that all cops are bad. I mean, there are bad people in all professions. Of course, you know that. But I would say usually the people most disgusted by bad cops are good cops because they're afraid that the bad cops are going to taint all cops. And do you think, however, though, in our recent past, we have had too many out of control officers, either in the city of Phoenix or in the country overall?
I think if you look across the country, you have situations where police officers have acted badly. In some cases, they acted in a felony fashion. You know, they were just wrong in what they were doing. Used too much force, used excessive force, whatever it may happen to be, they were wrong. I think they need to be called out for it. I think they need to be fired, arrested, whatever the case may be, whatever's most appropriate. And you're right. What every good cop hates is a bad cop, because it makes our jobs, or it makes, I'm no longer a police officer, obviously, but it makes the job of a police officer tougher. When people have reason to dislike you, have reason to distrust you based on the actions of a few officers.
Right.
And we see these things, you know, ad nauseum. When it occurs, you're going to see it all over the news. You're going to see it on the internet. You'll see it everywhere. And it has a tendency to truly amplify that type of behavior, which is unfortunate. Not everybody is like that. They just aren't. And like I said, I spent 36 and a half years wearing a uniform for the Phoenix Police Department, representing the citizens of Phoenix. Saw all kinds of things over those 36 years. I also saw a vast majority of really good police officers doing really good work who cared about their community.
Right.
And I think that is the key, and that's why most people get into that line of work.
Has there ever been any kind of I don't mean to suggest anything that's not of my experience, but has there ever been a struggle inside of you being, you know, obviously a member of the black community and a police officer?
Oh, most definitely. And, you know, it is what it is. You know, I have been stopped. And ironically enough, it was kind of interesting. I was an assistant chief. I was in my personal vehicle. And I was responding to an officer-involved shooting out on the west side. And I, at the time, lived out in Ahwatukee. So I jumped on Baseline Road, and I was moving a little quick. But it was 3 o'clock in the morning. And a police car pulled me over. And I thought, okay, you know, I'm speeding. I get that, or it's somebody who knows me. And they pulled me over, and the first words out of the officer's mouth were, "Where did you get this car? Who does this car belong to?" And I was in regular clothes, but I had my police radio there, and the radio went off, and his eyes got big. And yeah, I've had those situations. I sit back and I think about them. And you're absolutely right. You know, there are segments of our community, especially our African-American community, other communities of color, who have reason to be cautious of the police. But I think that in and of itself is all the more reason why law enforcement needs to, as much as they possibly can, interact with those communities. Because the more you get to know somebody, the harder it is to dislike them, or you get to understand their jobs more completely. And I think that is the case a lot of times when people understand what a police officer is up against. And again, the other night was a perfect example.
Yeah.
2 police officers responding on a guy possibly breaking into a car. They get there. A witness says he's over there. The guy runs. They chase him. He stops, turns around, just starts shooting. Yeah. So those types of things are in the back of everybody's mind. You try not to racially profile people, but you do develop a sense of somebody who may be up to no good. And that doesn't matter whether they're black, white, brown, Native American, what have you. It does not matter. But as a police officer, you have to always be on guard. You have to be careful.
I want to ask you about whether or not the defund the police movement and, you know, what happened after George Floyd kind of swung things too far one way and emboldened people to have at it with the cops. But I first want to ask you, because we are talking about your personal experience. Have you ever, when you were a patrol officer, found yourself, you know, having to maybe even stop yourself and say, hey, I feel like I'm going too far, or I got to rein my emotions in because I might end up actually brutalizing this suspect?
You do think about those things. And, you know, and I've been in my fair share of knockdown, drag-out fights. Most police officers, it happens. And there has to be a line. I always knew what that line was. You know, that was based on how I was trained, the training officers, the people I was around. And when I came on, the older guys, the more senior folks would praise you as a younger officer when you didn't use force.
Ah, okay.
They would say, hey, Rook, you did a good job with that.
Even back in the 80s.
80s and the 90s, and you felt good about it, and you knew you were doing the right thing, and so you continued that behavior. So that's what I was always exposed to, and I don't know that it has changed that much. What has changed is, officers are faced with, as Chief Sullivan said, 11 different times this year where people shot at police officers. Police officers are faced with a heightened level of violence these days.
Right.
And that we can't ignore. Do you
think that partly is because of what I mentioned earlier, that we've had this defund the police movement, and people are just more likely to go, you know what? Nobody likes cops, so I'm just going to join that group.
Yeah, there might be a very small percentage like that. There just might be. But I don't think that's the vast majority, because the people I know, and keep in mind, I teach in the criminal justice program at Arizona State University.
That's right. Yeah.
So I talk to a lot of young kids, and some who want to go into law enforcement, some who go to law school, just a variety of things. And they get it. They know that there's a fine line. They know, we all watched George Floyd die on camera. We really did. It was horrific. Yeah. And I thought that was wrong. Derek Chauvin knew better as a police officer. I fault just as much those other officers who stood there and didn't do anything. Yeah. They all had a responsibility. And it's unfortunate that they didn't stop him, didn't put their hands on him and say, knock it off. I mean, we got him. He's in custody. Stop it. Right. That's what people have a responsibility to do. And we have all, as police officers, get in a situation and you know what's right. You know what's constitutional, and hey, I got to stop this. I have the guy in custody. He's in handcuffs. I don't need to do anymore. Right. When you go too much further, that really, again, gives gives people an opportunity to dislike you. And you never want to give someone a stick to beat you with.
Yeah, that's true. For sure. Let's take a slight detour into the criminal justice system, which, of course, the police are the front line of that. This guy who was involved in this shooting, you actually broke it on our station that he, you made it official, really, that this guy had been arrested multiple times across multiple jurisdictions. I think it was 5 different counties now. He's been in trouble in Arizona, and he had just been released from prison early. He wasn't supposed to get out of prison until several days later, after he shot those officers. Do we need to look at something like going back to a little bit more of being hardcore when we're sentencing people, or did we try that and it didn't work?
Well, yes and no. I think we have tried it, and we have found that it has not been overly successful. Right. And what I think has to happen, judges have that discretion, and God bless them. I think they do a terrific job. And the vast majority of people, when you look at the studies, the empirical evidence shows the vast majority of people who are incarcerated and get out don't reoffend. They're tired of it. They move on. They get on with their lives. And there is a percentage of people who are, they recidivate. They get back involved in criminal behavior and what have you. This individual the other night, and I don't like to use his name, but I know he had some mental health issues. There's some other issues, some obvious crime issues, and you're right. He was in trouble in several different jurisdictions, I think in both California and Arizona. Mm-hmm. So he was a bit of a bad actor. And I'm a realist about these things. That's not everybody. This just happened to be somebody. I'm glad our officers were there to deal with him and not some citizen running into that. Yeah. I feel for our officers who were injured, and I just can't pray enough for them. But that's what we want our law enforcement officers to do, we want them to go down that dark alley. We want them to confront those dangers. We don't want that danger out there harming citizens and folks who are unaware and may not be prepared for such a thing.
Do you think there's some disingenuous politicians out there? I think just this question, the way I'm going to word it, makes it... it's obvious how I feel about this. There are disingenuous politicians who were all about defunding the police, or I'm trying to think what the other terminology might have been, reining in the police. And now they're all for, we got to get more funding to the police.
Yeah, again, that's another fine line you really have to walk to understand law enforcement completely and when it's done properly. And I firmly believe the Phoenix Police Department has always done it properly. We strive. We've had issues. Do not get me wrong. I know we have had issues, and I think we're dealing with them appropriately. But people have to understand that what we try to do the right thing for all the right reasons, constitutional and every otherwise. Sometimes, things go awry. And when that happens, a true test of a good agency is when it corrects itself. Mm-hmm. I think Phoenix has always done that. Now, politicians who want to defund and all these other things, I have asked some this question, what's your response? What do you mean defund the police? And I get that law enforcement probably should not respond to certain calls. I will give you that. And it's true, because I remember as a 21, 22, 23-year-old kid responding on a call of a person who's distraught and who knows what's wrong with them. They're acting wild and possibly off their meds, whatever the case was. I'd get out there, and my way of dealing with it and the way I was trained was to take charge of that situation.
Right.
I may have to raise my voice. I'm going to put my hands on them, but we know now that that's not the best way to deal with somebody who's in a crisis situation. Let's send in some experts. So I would advocate to anybody who says, let's defund the police, take things away from them. I say, no, let's fund the social service programs where we can respond, have professionals respond to that house where the family member is going wild, doing something they shouldn't be doing, and letting that professional deal with it. Now, if there's a weapon involved, all bets are off. The cops have to respond, and they should. But in other situations, I think it's wise to see who other than police should respond. And another thing that we have to do, and I'm a strong advocate of this, and the mayor has heard me say it, other council members as well as our city management, is let's make sure our officers have the tools, the non-lethal tools to deal with these situations.
Right.
And I'll take you back, I think it was about 2003, 2004, Phoenix Police Department had a record number of officer-involved shootings. I mean, we just did it, and I forgot the number, but it's well over 50 officer-involved shootings in 1 year. And the police chief at the time, a guy by the name of Harold Hurt, said, I want something changed. We got to change this. We should not be using this much force. So the other patrol chief and I, a guy by the name of Mike Frazier, who went on to be the police chief in El Mirage, then Surprise, and then city manager in Surprise, he and I had the patrol division, and we took a hard look at all the shootings, and we saw that if the officers had another tool, it might reduce the shootings. And that's when we, first major agency in the United States, the Phoenix Police Department, deployed every single patrol officer with a taser. Our shootings dropped by something like 65% the next year.
Wow.
Exactly. So when we recognize these opportunities and we can give our officers tools to do their jobs more effectively, then I think it's a win-win proposition. And it's the same way with identifying if when a call comes in, the dispatchers and the call takers can truly identify that this may be a call that police should not go on, it should be some other professional, we should do that. So we need to take those funds that people want to defund people with. I am all in favor of reallocating some monies and putting them where they need to be in other services, emergency services, social services, and they could respond on those calls and take care of those situations more effectively. The fire
department deal with it. No, I'm just
yeah. Well, no, the fire department, they're good at a lot of things, and they may be able to deploy people, train people that same way. But I feel the same way. Yeah, let the fire guys take care of it.
I always know that the fire and the police, always got this little rivalry going on.
Oh,
absolutely. So two more questions, because I can't believe I didn't even think to ask you about this, but how can I not ask you about what the city of Phoenix is facing with the Department of Justice report on the Phoenix Police Department and the possibility of a consent decree being imposed on the Phoenix Police Department, which could mean millions of dollars out of our budget and the hands being tied of the command staff at the Phoenix Police Department.
Yeah, we recognize that, and I think we have been very clear. And I say we, the mayor and the city council, as well as city management, we have been very clear that we have no desire or interest in signing onto a consent decree. We don't think that's the right way to go for a variety of reasons.
And you don't think the Department of Justice has a chance to win in court if they decide to go that route?
Well, we don't know. I like our chances personally. I just think looking at things in their totality, and I have studied other consent decrees in other agencies, not just as a council person, but I was doing that while at ASU and actually had some classes on it. And what I have found is that the bureaucracy that is in place takes forever.
Yeah.
And, you talk to former Sheriff Paul Pinzone, and he'll tell you at one point he had more officers in internal affairs investigating things than he had officers or detectives investigating crimes, that's outrageous. It is crazy. Outrageous. Yeah. And I don't want us as a city and as a police agency to lose control of our police department. We are a self-assessing, self-correcting agency, always have been. And I've made a couple of trips back to D.C. and had a sit-down conversation with folks in the Justice Department explaining just that. I'm trying to get them to understand the history of the Phoenix Police Department. First major agency in the United States that had civilians on its use of force and disciplinary review boards. Ruben Ortega was the police chief back then. People thought he was crazy when he was doing it, but he said, we have to get the community engaged and understand why we do what it is that we do. And he was right. So when you sit back and look at the history of the Phoenix Police Department, we've always done what we should do. And I'm not saying the Department of Justice is wrong in coming in and looking at things, because there was a hue and cry. And you had mentioned former Councilman Carlos Garcia. That was one of the things he pushed for.
Right.
So they came in and they looked and they said, okay, we have some concerns. If they continue to look, and they did, and I think they know this, we had those concerns too. And we're trying to, or have in a lot of cases, already fixed those problems.
Let's talk about one big problem that still lingers for the Phoenix Police Department, and that is the retirement time bomb. We've got a situation. I want to make sure I get my figures right here, so I'm going to read off of it. There are a little more than 2,500 sworn officers currently in the Phoenix Police Department. The city budget has funding for more than 3,100 officers. Meanwhile, Philadelphia, which has a similar population, has more than twice as many officers on the job. There's over 6,000 officers on that job, and they cover a land mass size that is it's actually less than a third of the size of Phoenix's land mass. How do we fix this problem before that retirement time bomb explodes? What do we need to do to get more officers in the city of Phoenix? I'm a resident. My wife and my kids spend the vast majority of their time in the city of Phoenix. I want them safe.
And I understand that, as do I. As an elected official, as a city council person, one of the things I am paying particular attention to, and I was recently asked by the mayor to chair our Public Safety and Justice Subcommittee, and I immediately sat down with the police department as well as some other organizations within the city of Phoenix. I want to know what it is we're doing about recruiting. I want to know the nuts and bolts. I don't want to know. I don't want to be told we went out to this job fair and that job fair. That doesn't do anything for me. What were the results? Who did we talk to? Are we going to the right places? So we're going to do a complete, just a remake on how we recruit. The military is a great place to recruit, but there's also the biggest recruiter out there is each and every one of us and our neighbors, because we all know somebody who is a good person and would be a good police officer. We all know that person. Let's encourage them to, explore a career with the Phoenix Police Department, because it is truly rewarding. There are benefits there that folks don't get in a lot of other professions. And I tell my students this at ASU, is that for 36 and a half years, every 2 weeks I got a paycheck. Without interruption, without any kind of disturbance or anything along those lines. And then I was eligible for retirement after 20 years. I stayed longer. Retirement was bigger. And my retirement benefits are such that if something happens to me, if I predecease my wife gets 80% of my retirement for the rest of her life. When you sit back and look at the benefits that employment with the city of Phoenix offers, I can tell you right now, there's none better.
You're just doing a commercial right now.
I'm trying my best. I'm trying my best. And on top of that, you can go to work for the Phoenix Police Department, and maybe you have a desire to fly helicopters or airplanes. We have an air support unit.
Right.
The officers and sergeants who fly the planes and the helicopters for the Phoenix Police Department started off as patrol officers, and they worked to it. Canine officers, there are investigators in every specific area you can imagine, everything from sex crimes, the child sex crimes, the homicide, the robbery, the SWAT teams, the canines, you name it. There's an opportunity to move around the organization, and you can move every 3 years, and you wouldn't get to half the opportunities in a 30-year career. Mm-hmm. So I think it is how we recruit, and we have to do a better job of telling people who we are and let people know that good people can serve their communities in a couple of different ways. And
we should just steal Phillies. We should just steal Phillies offers.
Too
many, right?
And Phoenix is spread out. We have to realize Phoenix is spread out much more. Philadelphia is more condensed. Citizens are a lot closer. We're spread out. Our officers are more in vehicles than in Philadelphia. Philadelphia, Chicago, New York, D.C. have a lot of foot patrols. Phoenix, not so much. So you have to look at the type of policing that is done in those communities. And I know you know that, but it's kind of interesting that they do have as many or twice as many, more than twice as many police officers, or almost twice as many police officers. It would be great if we did too, because I look at what we would be able to do. And I will say this, that, our budget for the police department is 3,200 officers. If we have an opportunity to continue or to move beyond that, I know our city manager, Jeff Barton, and his team, I think they would work awfully hard to find ways to make that happen. And not just police department, but the fire department, because, there are needs there as well.
Really enjoyed this, but I'm still trying to figure out if I should call you Assistant Chief, Councilman, or Professor Robinson.
Kevin works fine.
Okay, all right. Okay. Thanks, Kevin. I appreciate your time, and I appreciate you watching the AZ Political Podcast. We'll see you next week.
Thanks for watching the AZ Political Podcast with Jim Sharp. Click the box to watch more from KTAR News and tap the button in the middle to subscribe.